Yeah, it's recording now.
So we should be recording now. All right. The first minute is always sort of a wash. I just sort of try to say silly random things to like get
Yeah,
out
for
that
sure.
energy.
It is.
So
Okay.
unique New York. La 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 la. All right. So I think this is podcast 4 or 5 for me, which is
Okay.
awesome. So
And what sort of themes do you do in your podcasts?
So it's interesting. I have them unedited, and I might release them all to indie thinkers to get feedback. But like one was with my friend Jackson, where we talked about this synthetic biology competition we did called iGEM, the International Genetically Engineered Machines Competition, and you know how that went and how that helped us end up in Boston Biotech, and sort of our personal views on the whole thing. And then I did another one with suspended reason. We talked a lot about a whole lot of different things. The Rebus model, the psychedelic, there's like relaxed beliefs under psychedelics, this interesting paper we were reading. And he knows a lot about crypto and stuff like that. And then I talked with Matthew Gillenson about orgone theory and the libidinal economy. Yeah, Willem Reich, he was a student under Freud and had some very weird and interesting ideas. That was a fun one. I didn't really know what to expect, but
I actually read his article he wrote, and
his blog post.
Yeah, his blog post. It was, he writes pretty, like his writing is quite intense.
Yes, yeah,
and he's not happy with doctors, I can tell you.
No.
Not a big fan. So I was, but it is interesting. I mean, I think the problem with those things is that the science has moved on so much,
Right.
from a medical science side, that some of the physiology he's talking about is outdated. That was something we were thinking about in the 60s. I think specifically when it came, and there was something I read that really bugged me, and it was just something about, he talks about, retention of this orgasmic energy, and how that's a muscular paralysis, and it leads to inhibition of the breathing cycle, which yields lower brain oxygen levels. But that's just simply not true. We used to think about respiratory drive being based on oxygen. That the brain oxygen levels falling below X would increase the breathing drive, but the whole system's on carbon dioxide. So I thought that was a bit, you can see that this guy has come from a physiology of the 60s. I mean, there's some interesting stuff. I don't know.
So the way I looked into it, or the way I decided I was going to approach it, was sort of like all of Freud's theories. Freud's theories are mostly non-scientific, and a lot of them are demonstrably false, but I still think there's utility in, it's almost like how you can look at religion or old mythologies as still containing useful information, even though they're non-scientific. Sure. It's a lot about like psychological truths. And I did think we uncovered some interesting and useful ideas for sure. But
for sure.
I mean, my plan was to just like let him talk and get his stuff out. I tried to ground it in a lot of reality. So we talked about people who are like anorgasmic, and how that like a lot of Reich's patients, even guys, not just women, were anorgasmic, like very seriously neurotic people who weren't able to have orgasms, and how that comes from what he calls like muscle armoring, which current psychiatrists would just call like self-defense mechanisms or whatever. But and how if you try to go directly to the root of the problem, you skip the surface level stuff. So like Freud would go right to the unconscious, like, all right, what happened in your childhood that was so messed up that keeps you? But he was like, you gotta work from the top down. You gotta start with what are your like verbal and body tics, and then go lower into like what are the unhelpful thoughts that are keeping you, and then you try to go down to like the root unconscious of the problem. So
I mean, that's why I like the indie thinkers so much. It's just this like, there's sort of no limits on what it is, and I felt like going into academia, like I've applied for a couple of jobs in academia. There's sort of a specific set standard of, what language you use, how you approach, like what questions you're allowed to approach, and how
they're
you
very
should be approaching.
close-minded in a lot of places.
Yeah,
There was
I mean,
did you see Richard Dawkins on Twitter got in trouble for, he had a tweet where it was like, it's different to say that eugenics should be like condemned and is immoral and whatever. It's an entirely different thing to say that it wouldn't work in theory, right? So he
yeah,
decoupled. It was like, I'm not endorsing it. He was very careful in the beginning of the tweet to say, I'm not making a moral claim. I'm making a factual claim.
yeah,
Eugenics could work the same way that it works for, dogs, cows, plants, whatever. And people just ran him up the flagpole. And then there was this great blog post by someone talking about how scientists and engineers and a lot of people have the ability, he separates people into like high decouplers and low decouplers. People with high decoupling capacity can talk about hypotheticals outside of like the emotional or moral claims of like, I'll give you an example. When I was in high school, I studied the Battle of Britain for this big project. And as one small part of my project, I was like, how could Hitler have beaten England in World War II? And one of his main mistakes in the Battle of Britain was he stopped focusing on the RAF, the Air Force, and, taking out all the airplanes, and he started focusing on bombing civilians. And that actually, Winston Churchill spun that and turned it into like the entire populace came together and, we'll fight on the beaches, we'll fight in the streets. But if he had just taken out the RAF first, he could have invaded England, no problem. That was decoupled from the fact that obviously I didn't want Hitler to like beat England.
yeah.
But so people with low decoupling ability, generally they have like extremely high empathy for people, which is a useful skill, but it's like a double-edged sword, because if you have like a really high empathy, it's hard to talk about really like emotional and basically fucked up problems, right? Because then you'll feel the emotions. I like indie thinkers because it represents people that I think have a pretty high decoupling capacity.
Yeah, but have you read Angela Nagel's book Kill All Normies?
I haven't, and it's in my Amazon wish list. So
Oh, it's awesome. So my friend got it for me. It's actually how I got to know about Justin. Was
really?
with his so I was a big I have a big interest in Slavoj Zizek.
Yeah, I know Zizek.
Yeah, he's a funny guy.
He's a
And
character. It takes a while to understand him past this crazy lisp, but
yeah, but so he mentioned the book, and then I read it, and then I found an interview with Justin and Angela, and so I was reading that book, and she's described this kind of virtue as an economy of certain groups of people on the internet. So like virtue is something that people are striving to be. So any opportunity that you get to say, I'm in the in-group, I say this is wrong, and it's obviously wrong. Eugenics is obviously, no one's saying this it's right, but just the opportunity to say something bad is wrong is like an economy of, feeling valuable and feeling that you're good, and you put yourself on the top, the top tier of the internet, and all the bad people are the other side of the internet.
Right. So Joffrey Miller just had a book come out that was all about virtue signaling, and not the like sort of general description of virtue signaling where it's sort of used in a negative light, like, oh, this guy's just this person's just virtue signaling, right? They're talking about an issue and claiming to, like, when I think of people at the Academy Awards and they give their speech, or
Yeah.
people on Twitter who talk about whatever issue, that's interesting. But he's coming at it from an evolutionary psychologist perspective and talking about big capital virtue signaling, where it was like things that people do to demonstrate that they would be a good mate. And so he described how when he came through university, there were all these like protests, and how guys and girls would meet each other at protests, and a lot of them ended up becoming couples and getting married. It sort of selects for people that you might be ideologically compatible with, right? You have sort of similar values. So I haven't read it, but it seemed very interesting. There was a short YouTube video he did that was like, I think 20 or 40 minutes, talking about the like general concepts. But let me actually introduce you. So you know, I'm Nick White. This is the still as of yet unnamed podcast. Eventually I will pick a name and record an intro and get it uploaded to all the different apps. But I'm here with Camillo Coccia. Did I get that right?
Coccia, like gotcha.
Coccia, okay. And he is a doctor in South Africa, lived there all his life. And yeah, we're just gonna start talking about anything and everything, and whatever you wanna discuss. And then at the end, if you have anything to like plug, you want to send people to, if you have like a website or Twitter or whatever, we can do it at the end.
Sure. Yeah. Do you usually say great to be here?
I don't give a fuck, man. Like, this is so low key. Like,
yeah. I'm also just practicing, well, actually just getting used to discussing things in the open and just meeting new people.
right, exactly. I mean, it's a skill like anything else. So
yeah, no. So the link I sent you is, you know, it's been a project of mine that I've been working on the side. So last year, well, you know, I spent three years working in a place called Mitchell's Plain, which is sort of the ganglands just outside Cape Town. And that was extremely busy. So it was, you know, 80 to 100-hour work weeks. Wow. And yeah, it was bonkers, you know, just the overtime and the actual work was just, I think last year it was one of the busier emergency centers in the Southern Hemisphere. It's just this tiny little hospital, and it's four doctors per shift and 8-hour shifts, and 3 people are on shift per, you know, 3 teams on shift per day. So it works in a cycle like that. And sort of a very weird demographic of people. So infectious diseases was a big part of what we saw. And violent crime and lifestyle diseases. So it was this triple burden of disease, which was really sort of, I don't know if you would get that anywhere else in the world. And I took a sort of a break last year from working too hard. It was in interventional radiology, and I got some time to like actually reflect on what happened. And what's so funny in working under these like very extreme conditions, like with so much violent crime and so much sort of so much ridiculous suffering, that's just, you know, it's out of this world. It like reading Viktor Frankl seems like, you know, even like it was like I was there, like just those the people that are just, you know, brought in, wheeled in stretchers every 10-20 minutes. And, you know, looking back on that and the way we actually tackled it was kind of odd, which was what I've been reflecting on in that piece. And the piece is like trying to be a hard philosophical take on, what we're really doing as doctors. And it's kind of, what I was really getting at was, in the face of all these, real horrors in people's lives, we actually ended up tackling it with, pure science, like a really cold scientific approach, which was, that the person is suffering, you administer these and these drugs, and then like that's your job. You know, and one of my consultants actually described it as, you know, you've got your one guy, there's a bunch of people dying of thirst in one part, and you have to walk to the oasis with your buckets of water, and it's all up to you how much you can bring back and forth each day. But what was really like the inspiration for writing and going into and trying to explore, you know, philosophical task was that, you know, most of our patients, in fact, 1 in every 3 patients was going to die within 4 months of being admitted to that hospital. It's just that's how sick they are. It wasn't that we were, you know, really shit at our jobs. It was just that, you know, the people had end-stage disease, you know, either end-stage heart disease or end-stage infectious disease, end-stage HIV disease. So
Yeah,
within
so
6
you
months,
mentioned something last time about something like 20 to 30%
yeah.
of
So
the
I think
population had HIV.
at the peak of it, I looked it up, but I wasn't making up the 30%. It was 30% of our Black population had HIV. That's now 20% of our overall population. And we have
Okay.
about 71,000 HIV-related deaths every year, which is
How
down
many?
71,000
Good
in a
Lord.
population of about 40 million. And yeah, you know, it is a lot because those people are usually below the age of 40. So it's the young part of the population that, you know, that have been dying of HIV. I think, yeah, about if you work it out, it's about 8 million people living with HIV at the moment, just in this country. So there's that, and then there's the burden of you know, lifestyle diseases, which is what your problem is in the United States, which is mostly related to, you know, poor nutrition, obesity.
Yeah.
But our obesity rate is actually just eclipsed, I think in 2018, eclipsed the United States obesity rate. It's a
Really?
cultural, yeah. So it's a cultural thing. So to be a an overweight woman is a display of wealth. So there's actually like
Okay.
yeah, it's actually like I'm a, a mate finding, you know, behavior, if we
Yeah,
can put it like
that's
that.
very old school. That perception of beauty, that being overweight showed that you didn't lack, you didn't have want for food, right? You had an abundance,
Yeah,
and
it's always been like that. I think I was reading somewhere that there's this, you know, the display of wealth is always a display of free time. How much free time,
yeah.
how much time you spend not working. So back when most labor was outside, and most people who had a lot of free time would then be able to spend it inside. So it was a display of fashion to be pale.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then as it shifted, as work became more indoors, and then leisure time got to be spent sun tanning, so that darker skin then became more
Right.
fashionable. So that's like, I think it's also one of those things, you know, that now you used to had to work hard to become overweight. You know, you had to have lots of free time, but now you can just become overweight because you're sitting at your desk, and you actually have to make an effort to go to gym. You have to have free time to go to gym.
Right. It's harder not to be fat than
Yeah.
fat now. It's totally flipped.
So yeah, we've got a big obesity problem in South Africa. It's
Now,
and
I had a
diabetes.
question for you, because I was thinking, when it comes to, is there a big drug problem in South Africa?
Where I work, there was a massive, interesting history. I actually wanted to talk to you about that. But yeah, we do have a big, mostly Quaaludes. I don't think they exist.
Quaaludes.
Quaaludes,
That the
yeah.
last time I heard about Quaaludes was that movie Wolf of Wall Street. They don't make them anymore, or
Yeah,
at
they
least not in the States.
massive Quaaludes and crystal meth. And heroin, but no one injects heroin here. Everyone smokes it.
Smokes it. Okay.
Smoked heroin.
So I'm trying to think. They do something similar in the Middle East. I think it's called hashish, where they
Oh yeah.
grind up like weed into like tar, and then they put other stuff in that, and then you smoke that, and that gets you really, really messed up. But
Okay, yeah. Something like
but
that.
yeah, heroin, meth, and quaaludes. That's an
Quaaludes, yeah.
interesting blend.
Here it's
And
called Mandrax.
mandrax. Okay.
Yeah.
And is there a lot of income inequality in South Africa?
I think it's the most unequal country in the world. I think we're fighting
Wow.
for that place with Brazil constantly. We're always exchanging places.
So it's interesting. If you take a look at sociological studies, they were trying to make a link between poverty and violent crime. And what they found is that poverty in and of itself is not a predictor, but there is some sort of, I forget the name of the metric, but it's basically some sort of ratio between how close the disparately poor are to the obscenely rich, and that's some sort of
The Gini coefficient, isn't it?
Gini coefficient. Thank you. If a Gini coefficient is super high, it's extremely predictive of violent crime. And then the other interesting one I read, I haven't read this paper in a while, but it was looking at populations where the ratio of young males to older males is high. So basically like a lot of young guys in like their 20s with like not a lot of grandfatherly figures. Those populations are more likely to experience like civil war, which is a really interesting finding. Is basically like, depending on how the population structure looks, and you can sort of think it through and it like sort of makes sense, but it seems like there would be a little bit of the, you know, you add in a little bit of Gini coefficient and a little bit of that lopsided population structure, and you know, you get this situation in South Africa that's so horrible.
Yeah, I think that I just, you know, I'm thinking of it, there's a really great professor, Imran Kavadia, and I only read, my girlfriend actually studied under him, very, very specifically South African. And I don't know if you've heard of the writer J.M. Coetzee. He's
Coetzee, did he write that book about a boxer? No, I'm
I
pulling
don't
that
think
out of my
so.
ass.
He won a Nobel Prize. I mean, we know every South African who's won, you know, something of any
Right.
significance, because, you know, it's like Trevor Noah's our current, he's our poster boy. But James Coetzee, you know, was a professor at UCT, University of Cape Town, and there was an article written by Imran Kavadia who studied under him. It was just saying, you know, you can't ever talk about South Africa without mentioning HIV. You can't do it. So
Yeah.
I think that's a great point. I think, yeah, you know, we've got income inequality. I think we've got currently the amount of unemployed people in South Africa. Currently, our population of unemployed people is double the entire population of New Zealand. So,
what's the percentage of unemployed?
Sure, but it's
it's
somewhere
super
around,
high.
it's like 20% or something, or
Yeah.
higher than that. So that's, you know, the official employee. I mean, if you drive from Cape Town, it's a beautiful city. I don't think there's any place like it. You know, Table Mountain, and there's a massive, beautiful flat mountain, and you know, the bay, and it's these like very wealthy areas around the corner. You know, Michael Jackson had a house there, and it's this really rich place. And you go around the mountain, and sort of where I stay, and then there's this kind of line, like the Liesbeek River. And like the other side of that is just, you know, it's chaos. It's just like stretches and stretches of slums. So it's like just around the corner, there's just these two worlds. And so the unemployed amount of people are sort of that side. And
that's a feature of a lot of cities that are on a coast, where the closer to the water you get, generally the neighborhood is a lot nicer because people can afford the rising property rates. And so you have like a lot of, I'm thinking of Florida in specific, but basically you have a lot of waterfront homes. And then the closer you go inland, the neighborhoods, there's usually like a dividing road or bridge or something. And then the neighborhoods get very, very sketchy.
Yeah, then we've got, you know, actually if you ever flew into Cape Town, you've got this entire mountain range that actually sort of delineates like our part of Cape Town, and then you've got sort of the drier, almost a desert on the other side of the mountains. And it just on the mountain is this place called Stellenbosch, which is famous for, the amount of millionaires there are, and that's our winelands. So you've got this like very rich coastal area, you've got these
Right.
slums, and then on the other side you've got these massive winelands with these, multimillionaires and art galleries and things like that. And so, like we've got an unemployment rate, you've got the crazy inequality, but we've also got, the amount of people that died of HIV, and the amount of those who were parents of what became, child-headed households. There was this thing in the news like child-headed households, and we just, sort of that faded into history, and no one ever thought that would become
Child-headed houses. I mean, the parents died, and so
both parents died, and there was no one to take
it's
care of
like,
them.
a bunch of kids, and whoever's the oldest basically takes
Yeah.
charge. I mean,
Yes.
it's horrible.
Yeah. So it was, and it happened so quickly. Like it happened within a few years. No one even really realized it was happening, because also, we live in the city, so it is very close to home, but so much of South Africa is kind of rural. The whole center of South Africa is just, not much happens, and not many people know what goes on in the middle there. In fact, when I was a student, they found a feral family that had never seen other
Oh
people
my
before.
God.
In the center of the country, like in this really secluded part, they were planning and building a road, and the prospectors came across this family of about 20 people, and had no recognizable language, had no recognizable behavior patterns, and they just happened. They obviously couldn't disclose the location because they don't want them to become a tourist site. Or foreign linguists come over and study what language they're speaking. But there's parts of South Africa completely habitable, really beautiful, but no one knows what goes on there. So that's where
So the
most of
only feral, I remember reading about feral people. This was in a psych class many years ago, but there was one example of it was a really horrible situation where the parents basically locked up their daughter, like when she was a kid, up until through her teenage years, and then they finally caught them and threw the parents in jail. But this person had basically like not acquired language. I mean, feral. I mean, it's
yeah.
exactly what it sounds like, and it was a
I
horrible
read
situation.
I read some stuff on this, and apparently after 4 years old, if you haven't learned language by 4, you can't learn language. It's just one of those things you have to be born with. You can't understand the logic of language unless you've been brought up with it. So they couldn't, yeah, and no one's allowed in that area. They have to obviously preserve what human rights they can of those people. So
Well,
no
so
one's really allowed to
this
study
is a point that Jordan Peterson brings up in this was before he was the cultural phenomenon he is now, when he was still just given YouTube. Like, he would record his class lectures, but he's basically like, the point of parents is to socialize their kids by the age of 4, because
them.
if they haven't acquired a bit of language and a bit of social structure that's going to help them make friends and deal with parents, if they're not properly socialized by 4, they're just screwed for the rest of their life. Like, no one's going to want to be their friends. They're going to have a distrust for most authority figures, and a lot of those people just end up being repeat offenders and going in jail. And so I mean, it's a really, really serious issue. Like, how I mean, we sort of obsess over the youth in America. I think we definitely have like sort of a cult of youth, but in that sense, in the sense that the we should maximize how well we socialize kids by the time they're 4. And then I was reading something that like parenting does not matter as much as people think it matters, except for you get to, you do as much as you can up until 4, and then a lot of it is just genetics.
Yeah,
So
and friends, I heard. Friends as well. Like, people are sort of hardwired to fit into the group. So if they're in a good group of people, they'll tend to
right,
learn behavior patterns in their school or
they'll
their
be okay.
neighborhood. Or yeah, so I also read that somewhere. But also, this maybe it's just my bias, because I guess I feel like I've been becoming grouchy and a bit more conservative as I get a bit older. But I wonder if maybe there's not something to be said by, what the conservatives were saying in the 80s, that, there was this explosion, this liberty of women joining, joining the workspace, and, what happens to the kids, who looks after the kids. And there's this sort of vacuum in the liberal argument. Like it never really came through to me. It was just sort of, well, someone's going to do it,
Well, so there was an article I read. I forget. It might have been a New York Times article, but it was basically like, if you're super wealthy and you're a coastal elite, generally both parents have really high paying, high powered career position. They've basically outsourced child rearing to people from the third world. They get like, someone from Mexico or Colombia. And then, so this article was focusing on interviewing those people. And so the nannies become super attached to the kids and vice versa. But the nannies often have their own kids back in the other country that they don't take care of. And like, it's this weird shuffling of child rearing where essentially the first world outsources their child rearing, and then the people that do the child rearing don't. Like, they just have like an uncle at home that's taking care of it. It's really horrible. And go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, it's just this weird, because living expenses quite has increased quite a bit here in South Africa. Yeah, but what's been weird is to see, obviously we sort of seeing these problems as doctors, because I feel like every social ill always ends up with a doctor. Like if it's drugs, if drugs aren't a problem until they become a problem, and when they become a problem, they end up in hospital. Either it's an overdose, or it's a mental health problem, or it's an infection at the needle site, or a pneumonia, or a cancer. Hopefully not, but all these social ills end up at the doctor. And what I've been seeing is just this crazy epidemic of children who are either constipated or have diarrhea. And maybe our organ research is the kind of guy to talk about the constipation, because there's no one to potty train these kids. So when they get to, they get put in creches, and the creches aren't there. It's one creche here. A creche, you just put your kid
kindergarten?
with, kindergarten, I guess. Yeah, kindergarten.
It's like a preschool for.
Yeah, but for even with, for up to 2 years old, like really young kids.
Okay.
So I don't know what the minimum age for going to what these creches or kindergartens is, and they're not like, they don't register. It's just like a local mom who's like, yeah, just pay me, I'll look after your kids. And then these other moms go and work, and are wage slaves, and get enough money to pay all their bills, and their husband also works, so they're never at home. And then by the time these kids are 6 years old, they haven't been properly potty trained, and then they come into the doctor because they're constipated, because they're terrified of the toilets at school.
Yeah.
And it's just, I could never imagine, we were always taught, obviously we're in the third world, so diarrhea is what we are trained to cope with as doctors. But the amount of constipation we're having is just unbelievable. It's just these people are terrified of going to the toilet. They just spend so much of their time in nappies. And then obviously the diarrhea is because all these kids are just housed together in one room, and they just spread disease amongst each other like nobody's business.
Probably not eating very well either.
Yeah, not really.
It's really horrible and like easy to not pay attention to. Like, I think the fact that we've moved away from the extended family to the nuclear family, and the fact that almost nobody can pay for living expenses on a single salary.
Yeah.
I mean, welcome to the, this is your this is your world on neoliberalism, you know, a
Yeah.
great success by all accounts, but like, you can't raise your kids. Like, you have to go to work. And so I like doing, I consider myself, you know, kind of out there and willing to experiment and do sort of radical things. I think it would be interesting to try, like I dated a girl for a while who grew up on a commune, which is sort of trying to get back to that tribal idea of like, you live with about, you know, 80 people, or, you know, 5 to 10 families. And then, so if your kid has a problem, they don't want to, you know, at a certain age, like teenagers, they don't want to go to their parents to talk about it. They'll go to one of their aunts or uncles. And then it's a contained area, right? So it's like a big farm and there's houses everywhere, and the kids had their own clubhouse they could go to, like, you know, be sexually explorative without the prying eyes from their parents, but they're not in danger. They're still in the sheltered Garden of Eden or whatever, where they're protected by the family. But like, you know, these kids are able to have freedom, and you know, they you know, tried weed there and had their first drinks and you know, first girlfriends and boyfriends, but it was all in the context of this little tribe. And I thought it sounded like idyllic. I mean, I grew up in the suburban hellscape that is middle America, which is like really existentially like bland and boring. Like, every house is a carbon copy of each other, and like, you know, you find your kids to play with, but like just no adults. Like, you would come home after school, there's no one there. You could just go and do whatever the hell you wanted. It's very, very strange. And I think that in the future generations will look back on us and what we did and be like, how did they not know? How did they not know that this is going to be so bad? You know, you were talking about being more conservative and getting grouchier. You know, there's this great phrase about how, you know, if you're not liberal when you're young, you have no heart. But if you don't grow into being conservative, then you haven't like learned anything, or like, you know, I don't really consider myself one way or another. I'm very liberal on some things and conservative on others. I think to sit in one position and think that you've reached like a moral endpoint, or you have everything figured out, you're just a fucking idiot. Like, you should always have skepticism of your own ideas and constantly stress test them and update them, which is painful. Because, you know, you look back at your old self two years ago and you're like, God, I was a fucking idiot. But you hope that, you know, if you remain the same way for your entire life, like, it's just, you didn't learn anything.
Yeah.
So the conservative emphasis on the family, first of all, I don't even think that should be a conservative, like,
yeah, I don't think it is.
That doesn't make sense. That, first of all, I don't believe it. I think a lot of it is in bad faith, at least on the Republicans' part in the US. But like, I don't see how having intact families and having like a strong house is a left-right issue. That should just be like a normal person issue, right? Like, why wouldn't you want that?
I just want, it's just these things become the battleground of disagreements, you know, because what was at stake was women's freedom, you know, reproductive or freedom to work or career freedom, and the restraint was the family, and I suppose that just became the battleground. So
at the risk of getting myself in trouble, which I always do, I'm gotten better at not censoring, but a little bit, but just having a bit better of a filter. I think college, you shouldn't go to college necessarily at age 18. I think you should go into the workforce and then, or like, here's the thing, guys can sleep around until they're 30 or 40. Their reproductive health is fairly okay, you know, as they get older. Like, guys can still have kids when they're 40, 50, 60, whatever the sperm count, whatever. But women after the age of, I mean, you're the doctor, you tell me, but like, after 35, 40, 50, it's almost impossible
35, yeah.
for kids, right?
35 is, I think, when it comes to Down syndrome, which is the major concern with
That it
reproducing later,
explodes. You have a high risk of
it's,
twinning. You have a high risk of
yeah. But it's
which
geometric, so it's not like it's a linear thing as you get older. It's once you reach about 35, I think 35 is just that, that kickoff point where it reaches 1%. And
yeah,
then every year from then, it's after 35. So I think from 30 to 35, the risk goes up from sort of 0.5 to 1%. And then from 35 onwards, it's geometric. So it's, a percent per year. It's
right.
just, the chance just skyrockets. It's
And they
by,
have
by
this big lie where you can freeze your eggs. You can be a high-powered career girl boss and freeze your
well,
eggs and worry about marriage later. And it's like, I don't. And then there's another the idea that that your career is going to give you more satisfaction than having a family, I think is a really damaging myth. I
I
think
think
that's really
we
fucked
were,
up.
I think sort of my sisters, the slightly older generation, they were sold something dodgy there. That wasn't true.
I'm
I don't know
extremely
if,
cynical and like suspicious that a lot of mainstream ideology, you get it from like whatever Hollywood. There was a writer, I think, I forget, it might have been a Washington Post or New York Times or something, but she wrote like a lifestyle sex column for something for many, many years. She was inspired by Sex in the City. She went and moved to New York and lived that lifestyle and became like a pretty well-respected journalist publishing this stuff. And then this is her writing at the age of like 40 or 45. And she was like, I regret my entire 20s and 30s because I didn't settle down and now I can't have kids and I'm fucking miserable. And I realized that all I have is a collection of stories of like going out to bars and sleeping around, which is fun for a time being.
yeah.
But like the older you get, and I'm finding myself too, is like, I just, I'm not as interested in partying as I used to be when
Mm.
I was a kid. And one night stands do not do anything for me anymore. I'm a guy and not, commitment problems or whatever. Like me in relationships, that's a whole nother tangent that we don't have to get down. But
Mm.
like, I'm getting older. I'm like, yeah, I do want kids. And, we can talk about how messed up I think marriage might be in some scenarios and whatnot. But I do think the idea there's there's a lot of value in having a long-term monogamous relationship and having a family.
I remember when I was a student there, I was I was in a really conservative part of sort of how I imagine the deep South to be. But
Yeah, can we
in
back up a little bit? Are your parents, just tell me a little bit about your background. Your parents are
sure.
conservative or like,
So
no, your mom's Italian and then your dad is South
no, so
African?
my father is oh man, I'm not sure if
You don't have to get
you're
into it if
gonna.
you don't want to.
No, it's interesting. It's just I'm not sure how many followers you'll still have after I tell you my family history. Just because of it's kind of a bit dodgy, but let's go. So my father grew up. He was born. He's an old guy, so he was born in 1943.
Okay.
In just the end of World War II,
43. Wow.
1943. Yeah, he's an old guy. Um, he basically his father was counterintelligence for Mussolini's army. So he was raised, in a fascist household, and his mom
Was he in
was a wet.
Milan?
No, he was in Parma, which is just in
Parma,
the
okay.
north, where the
Yeah, I know
ham and
where
the
it is.
cheese comes from. Um, and
Prosciutto di Parma.
yes. Oh yeah, you also have Italian. Yeah, so he's from there, from the north, from the fascist part of Italy, and
Yeah.
then he went to University of Bologna, studied engineering, and got outsourced by a Belgian company. What the Europeans were doing there was sort of slowly handing back infrastructure to African countries, so making sure sustainable wiring to mines, making sure mining equipment had available sourcing, so they didn't have to depend on
Right.
European importing during while the colonials were leaving and afterwards. So he worked through Central Africa during during civil war time, and a lot of political upheaval. And then his brother and him worked together as journalists and intelligence for the apartheid government. And my father was a staunch supporter of Mussolini. My dad was a
Wow.
proper fascist.
It's funny because a lot of Italians, older Italians, so my grandmother grew up, I asked her one time, I was like, what was Christmas like when you were growing up? She was like, well, Mussolini was in power. We wore a lot of black. It's like, wow, like that's so far from my experience of life. But so her dad was part of the partigiani, the partisans. I mean, he was anti-fascist and not Antifa the way it exists now in like Portland, but like old school European anti-fascist.
Yeah.
So he didn't want her wearing black at all. And she tells the story of like wanting to go to some live music with friends, and her mom like smuggled in some black clothing that she could put in her backpack so she could change and go out. So just like crazy stuff that we have no concept of what that is anymore. But so Italian politics is wild, and there's like 1,000 political parties. But I remember there was an election, because they have to have their election every 3 months. It was Mussolini's niece was running on a fascist platform, and she was getting a lot of votes. Like there's old people, they exclaim, they just go, quando c'era lui, like when Il Duce was there, because he tapped into something. He tapped into that like desire to be a strong national, like that's why all these fascist people and characters, they always go to like old school mythology and have like very specific types of architecture and obviously I'm not saying I support fascists, but I'm just trying to get into the mindset of like how people could see that. I think once you get sick of how slow and bureaucratic and you're worried about your cultural collapsing, whatever, it's a good time for fascism to come in and try to sweep the mood.
I think that I read it somewhere that there were two major ingredients to fascism. The one was paranoia, and the other one was nostalgia. So it's like
exactly, paranoia. So it's like if you have a strong sense of victimization, feeling like a victim is predictive of really messed up politics. And I think you can see that in a lot of places. But like the Germans after World War I, they were paying reparations out the ass to France and all these other countries. They had a small civil war internally with communists, I think. There was massive inflation. Unemployment was like, crazy high, and there was might have been some sort of infection that was going around. I heard about a paper where if you have a country that just had a really bad contagious disease, it's predictive of the rise of authoritarian right-wing governments.
That's interesting, because
they always talk about the country in terms of like a body, and then foreign invaders. And it's like, we gotta have a healthy immune system to fight. It's very strange digging. That's a deep rabbit hole.
Yeah, because
Go ahead.
We're going through that at the moment. So I mentioned him, I think yesterday. His name is Julius Malema, and he's like proper. His party says we are Marxist-Leninist. So that's his. That's actually the platform on which he's running, and his like we had this outbreak of xenophobic violence. We had like people in the streets targeting Nigerian shops and just like burning Nigerian-owned things down. And his response was, the anger shouldn't be targeted at Africans. The anger should be targeted at white people. That was his answer to the xenophobic violence. It was just like the hatred is right. We're trying to cultivate the hatred, but you need
just direct it in the right place.
The right people.
It's fucked up.
Yeah, so he's like, and he's absolutely left wing, absolute like state ownership of land against private property. All on 19 businesses shouldn't be able to own land, only 99-year leases. Um, all these, kind of Soviet era style state control of production, which is, not really Marxist. If you read Marx, he doesn't mention the state. He
I mean,
mentions workers.
Marx's ideas have been. It's funny. There was someone said that Marx would not have been a Marxist.
Yeah.
There's yeah. His ideas have been sort of. It's like a lot of philosophers, like Nietzsche too. They've been repackaged, repurposed, reinterpreted to support pretty perverse political positions.
Yeah, he's Leninist. I mean, that's what he's about. He's about this, the oncoming revolution and how to capture the soul of the revolution. And this guy's gaining a lot of political traction. He's got a lot of political power in parliament. Because
are you worried, like personally? Like, do you have a plan to leave?
Yeah, I think I think all of us do. Like there is, like I think there was an interview Julius Malema had. He said, we're not calling for the killing of all white people, but not yet. We're not there yet.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. Do you have an Italian passport?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're just organizing my girlfriend. She's also half Italian.
Oh, nice. Good choice.
Yeah. So we're just getting her passport ready, and then.
I got to renew mine. I still have one where I'm like very baby faced, and I think it might be expired. So,
no, but it is scary here. I think like even if you're sort of politically to the left, and you're like, I wouldn't mind to see a leftist party. Just the rhetoric that's flying about, and just the fact that it's sort of on the background of, again, we were talking yesterday, like the American dialogue on the oppressed minorities. Black and Hispanic minorities and those things, and that black people are inherently disenfranchised, and that sort of discourse has actually just come to South Africa, where it doesn't fit. We do absolutely have a black populace that's disenfranchised, but they're a majority. They're a civil majority.
What's the breakdown between you mentioned there were at least during apartheid there were 4 main races. It was like white, black, you said colored, and then Indian, which was really interesting. I didn't know they were. You mean India and from India?
Yeah, from India, as in they were taken on boats as slaves to Natal, which is the eastern part of South Africa. So South Africa looks like kind of that shape,
right.
And in the east of South Africa, there's a place called KwaZulu-Natal, which is Zululand, where the Zulu tribe hails from. And the Zulu tribe are, they were genetically selected to be warlike. So they would literally kill the weakest people at kind of an old age, like 12 years old. So they would scatter thorns into the bush, and they would have to stomp it down with their bare feet. And if they would show pain, they'd be killed and things like that. So they were genetically selected by King Shaka, who was a warlord, our African warlord. So that's in the east of South Africa, and then sort of towards the south, you get the everyone loves it, the Xhosa tribe with the click. It's XHOSA.
Yeah.
And they're sort of an offsplit.
Nosa.
Xhosa. So you got 3 clicks. You got and
wow.
Like yeah. So there's 3 clicks in that, and then towards the north, you've got the Pedi and the and anyway, like the black population makes up about 85% of the population, 90%, and then everyone else is sort of 5s and 10%. So absolutely, I think like the racial discourse has like its very own tone here and its very own history. But
someone was mentioning they follow American politics not because they really give a shit about America, but because if something happens in America, everyone else is downstream of American discourse. It's like, and for whatever reason, like Australia will import our and Italy too. Like once people start talking about certain stuff in the States, it just flows downhill, which I think is stupid because I don't think we know what we're doing. But the talk about the sort of the the racial discourse, I think, has gotten really messed up in the States. It's very much like the oppression Olympics, like how far up on the totem pole, on the hierarchy of victimhood are you, that allows you to speak more freely about whatever topics. And like, I don't know, if you brought back the old school civil rights leaders back in the day, I think they would punch everyone right in the dick for how stupid we're acting. Like, this is not, I don't think it's helpful for anyone to I mean, obviously stuff is very messed up still. I think we're trending in the right direction, but it's not clear to me that like willingly accepting, like, I'm a victim, everything is keeping me down, that is not conducive. Even though we can talk about how pulling yourself up by the bootstraps is like, in a lot of sense, like a myth and physically impossible. It's a useful lie. You can understand that it's like sort of a load-bearing myth for our cultural whatever spirit or attitude. The idea that, you know, you're in the land of opportunity, and if you work your ass off and work smart and hard, it's not just working hard, it's working smart and hard, you can make it. Because I mean, there's people who are house cleaners that work 10 times harder than CEOs. I have no doubt.
Yeah.
So it's not just working hard, but if you work smart and hard, I still think that you can make it in the US. But like, you know, you go to these universities and you talk to people on campus and they're like, it's so defeatist. They're like really like black-pilled cynical, where they're like, I can't change anything about politics. I can't change anything with my career. All this stuff is messed up. The only solution is like protesting, and not even violent protesting, just like making signs. Like, I respect European protesters and anti-fascists because they'll firebomb cars. Like France with the yellow vests and stuff, they've been out of work for like months now, and they are really committed to the cause. Whereas American protests are like, we got like a free weekend, we're gonna go paint some signs and make like a fat Trump blimp, and that's how we show our political. It's just, if you put that energy anywhere else, I think it would be useful.
I think South African protests are something else. Like it's the, like, we have like songs, we have protest songs, and there's like groups of people who march down the street like dancing. Like, that's the protest. But they're obviously getting out of hand now. It's like people burning trains and people, you know, burning other people. So that's, you know, don't protest like South Africans. Somewhere in between.
I would be really interested if someone could do like a sociological study of like, have you heard of like the what are they called? Effective altruists. So effective altruism is this idea that like you want to be an altruist, but you don't want to donate your money to something that's not going to be effective. So they basically commit to dedicating 10% of their income for the rest of their life, but effectively. They like rank order different charities and stuff like that, and other places to put their money. So they're like, you know, I'm not going to waste a lot of effort into protesting, but I work hard at my job, I make some good money. 10% is always going to go to this, and I've covered my moral, duty to be altruistic to my fellow man. So it would be interesting to look into political action. Where can you put your energy to get the most bang for your buck? Like, is it emailing your senator? Is it going out and doing a street protest? Is it, what's it called economically when you refuse to buy from a certain place?
Boycotting.
Boycott. Is it boycotts? Like, I don't know the answer, but that would be an interesting thing to know.
Yeah, I guess that's also something that Justin Murphy's been on about. But, you know, I think no one really knows. I wonder if that's not a 21st century crisis, is that people feel like there's so much potential for change, but like the fact is, like, you've got to have the potential, you've got to have the motivation, you've got to have the people behind it, the money behind it, and then things have to work out the way you want it to. You know, like that's like the that's the thing that it's, you know, that blows my mind. It's just the amount of energy that gets put into something, and then it just sort of
I
it
mean, I
doesn't
don't think
happen.
elections are the right way. I don't think voting, like the fact that there is so much support in this country for like when we had Obama, and then now Trump and Bernie Sanders, like those were all populist movements that wanted change. People are
Hmm.
really sick and tired of the American political system, but we put these people in power, and nothing changes. Like it's
Well,
not.
you think your democracy's fucked? Let me tell you
Oh,
something.
please,
So,
please do.
no, like, so we've got the ANC, the African National Congress, and
Mhm.
they've really ballsed up the country, like absolutely. It's not that it was great. It's not that it was, you know, there's that. It's kind of, there's this vacuum of nostalgia that no one's really comfortable being nostalgic for, you know, the back in the day, because it was just, you know, it was almost slavery, basically. The minority of the country holding on to like the majority of slave, you know, an enslaved populace.
Is it uncomfortable talking? I mean, I imagine this could get me in trouble, but like, is it uncomfortable being nostalgic or looking back at colonial times in certain parts of Africa and other places in the world and being like, you know what? It wasn't all bad.
Yeah, look, there was a book that
You
came
say
out.
that? Like, is that, yeah,
Like,
go
I mean,
ahead.
there was a book that came out, and it was called Native Nostalgia. It was like, well,
Native
yes,
nostalgia.
things were
Okay.
like, and I actually, I think, you know, because I work in the poorer parts, I actually ask people, you know, what was it like then and what's it like now?
Mm-hmm.
And most people have these really interesting, profound answers, and because it was just supposed to be such a massive change, and it was just kind of this like weak cadence. It was just like this, you know, before 1994, before our first democratic elections, it was, you know, the Secret Service, like the state police, like Nazi Staatspolizei, like that
Mm-hmm.
level of things would come and knock on your door, you know, 3 a.m, be like, come on, it's an inspection, pass
Jesus.
books, you know, and like people remember that, like my patients, like these older guys, they remember like the days that they would walk on the street, but like they would also tell these funny stories, you know, like the policeman would come and arrest the a criminal or a suspect, and the
Mm-hmm.
way he would do it was he would come on his bicycle and stop outside the house, you know, ring his bell, and the guy would run after this policeman on his bicycle to the police station, and you know he would then be you know, service time or service 6 days, because we were allowed six
They
days
didn't
arrest
cuff
without.
them. They just
No,
followed the
no, it's just
bicycle
like
walking
this.
along.
Yeah,
That's so
like these
funny.
weird stories, like but you know, it was a bureaucratic state, so obviously all the bureaucratic, every person of color, and my father, an immigrant, had to carry a passbook to get from,
Mm-hmm.
you know, white land to different lands, the Bantustans they call them. So it was a bureaucratic state, so all the bureaucratic systems worked, you know, passports and things, and all the roads worked, because it was actually a rich, flourishing country, because it was built on slavery. Like, and now there's just this sort of massive corruption amongst the state, and there's just this, you know, we had this South African, I suppose, bureaucratic capitalism based on slavery, um, and now we've just got pure capitalism where people have been managed to multiply their wealth,
Mm-hmm.
and the poor are still as poor as they were, but just with the amount of violence and the amount of neglect, and the massive explosion in population that we've also seen here, it's just multiplied all these problems. So like nothing really got better for the majority of South
Right.
Africans, but they still vote for the same political party. They still vote for the nostalgia of that, like, but it could get better. They saved us from, it's it's like, you know, they can do whatever they want. The current ruling political party know that they will not lose an election, because they can just do whatever they want. People will vote
Yeah.
on nostalgia.
That's
Um,
how I see when people vote here for Democrats or Republicans, and we can go out of how stupid the two-party system is. It's it's just obscene to me that like your choice is red or blue. But I want to choose. No, 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 no. Shut the fuck up. You get one of two. What are you, an independent? What are you, a Green Party? What a joke.
What's
Like,
the independent? How does that work? Because I've seen people vote for independent.
I'm a registered independent, which means in some states I can vote for the primaries of either team. In some states I can't vote for the primaries at all. I can just choose whatever. We have a libertarian party that's basically a joke, but like, it's not a democracy, it's a republic. And so for each county, they like weigh the counties differently. And then there's like delegates and super delegates. And then it's like a weird, it makes no sense. They were doing the primary this year, which they stole from Bernie last time. The DNC basically just gave to Hillary, and we're like, what are you really gonna do? Like, what are you really? Yeah. They claimed that they were not, that they were a corporation, that they're not a political body, and they can choose whoever they want. So basically, the primaries are like political kayfabe. You know that wrestling term, how wrestling is fake, but everyone believes it. It's make believe, and they were showing videos from the Iowa caucus where Pete Buttigieg had paid. There was a corporation, which I swear to God is called Shadow, and they developed the app to count votes in the Iowa. And the guy who's the CEO is like publicly super pro Pete Buttigieg, and the Pete Buttigieg campaign like donated like thousands of dollars to this corporation, and then oh no, it's all screwy, even though they like stopped polling, even though they're supposed to release important polls. The counting took forever. They said that Pete Buttigieg was in the thing. He claimed before the results were even released that he won, basically trying to fuck Bernie Sanders over. And there was a YouTube video where they were showing, it was like 600 votes to 350. It's a tie. What? We have to flip a coin to see who gets the delegate. And they showed the video of the guy flipping the coin. He flips it, he catches it in his hand, and then there's like people watching him on the outside, and he's like looking at it. He like pulls his hand away and then flips it onto the other hand, and he goes, heads. All the delegates go to Pete Buttigieg. People are like, you fucking serious? Like, we just saw you peek at the coin. It's democracy. In 2016, for one of the caucuses, I think it might have been Nevada, they literally did like a voice, like, yell if you approve of the rule change we made last minute. And people started yelling yay and yay. Yell if you don't approve. And then one person had to decide by volume of yells if the rule change went through. It's psychotic. So I used to not respect people who like didn't vote, because I was like, you should probably still vote. But there was a interesting argument I read where it's like, if you vote, it's an implicit, psychologically, it means you, whatever the outcome is, you are not
consenting to the process.
You're consenting to the process of being utterly screwed. You're consenting to whatever the status quo is. Even if your person gets in, you're consenting to the process of how they get through.
That's absurd. Like I've heard tales of it, but it's just, you know, aren't you guys the leaders of the world? Aren't we all supposed to be learning from you?
No. People were bitching because Russia posted some memes on Facebook. They're like, Russia's interfering with the election. I'm like, yeah, so is Google, so is Facebook, so is the mainstream media, so are all these conspiracy, like that's the meta game of everyone is trying to, we used to celebrate in America screwing with other countries' elections. Like we were really excited when we got Gorbachev in Russia. We were like, how we nailed Russia's election. It was like a New York Times like front page article.
But how was Julian Assange as well? What? Like how that's been terrifying as well, because he's been tortured
those leaks, those WikiLeaks, man. I read them, and that's a dark like rabbit hole.
Exposed like war crimes.
It basically exposed how much there's corruption and pay for play, and how the established political parties work hand in hand with the established media to push certain points of view, to kill stories, to make stuff work, and There was the Panama Papers. It was like
Yeah.
thousands and thousands of documents that no one is talking about. The
Yeah,
journalist who
because
released those Panama Papers, dead, fucking murdered in 2 days after that thing got released.
seriously, because
Jeffrey
I mean,
Epstein got murdered. Like it's so obvious now with the internet. Like it's
yeah,
impossible to lie, but just everyone in government is a fucking pedophile and weirdly satanic. Like I just, and that used to be a meme, like a joke
yeah.
conspiracy, but you read some of those emails and you look down into some of this stuff and I'm like, I don't know, man, this could be true.
I usually get embarrassed about talking about our system, but man, like I think American politics is also on such a global scale. Like in South Africa, it's like, you know, the guy lives down the corner. Like, the guy is just over there, you know. But we just have like it's just embarrassing because also like our politicians are so uneducated. They're literally our ex-president Jacob Zuma. Like
His
he
last name is Zoomer.
Zuma is
Oh,
Z
Zuma.
ZUMA. That would be too good.
Zoomer.
But he basically he ran on the fact that like he dropped out of school at 13 uh, to fight against apartheid. Like that was
Yeah.
his what he ran on. So he didn't even have a matric. He just like he couldn't read his own speeches. He couldn't read numbers that were sort of over a million.
Jesus.
He would just say these absurd numbers, and he just like couldn't say it. He just
Yeah.
didn't know the English for it. It was just horrible. Like
So I mean, I
and
think our system is bad, but like, I don't know, man. I think the banks run this shit. Like,
I,
if you're playing, if you're like one of these massive banks, and you have $100 billion, or between you and your buddies, you're controlling $1 trillion. That's like playing a video game like Grand Theft Auto, and you know how you can type in the cheat codes like up, up, down, square, circle, whatever.
yeah,
You have an unlimited health bar and an unlimited amount of money. That breaks the game.
yeah. So you can just
They've these super corporations like Google and whatever, and even the old school ones like the like blue chip stocks or whatever, like Dow Chemical Company. Once you have a certain amount of money, man, do you give a fuck that there's a grassroots movement that wants to do ranked choice voting? No, because
yeah,
you own the company that makes the voting machines. You own the
yeah,
company that has the software. And oh no, there's a glitch. Like it's just, I would rather them just say that they're screwing us and be honest about it and be like, what are you really gonna do? Than
yeah. That would be
this
nice.
sort of tongue-in-cheek like smarminess. Like, oh, I saw on CNN there was a clip where it was like, don't use the word oligarch because that's a slur. Don't call who's the guy who's running now? Bloomberg. Bloomberg is this fucking billionaire from New York. He's basically like Trump in a different suit. And he's bought every ad on YouTube. I swear to God, him and League Shadow Legends should just come together and put out the worst commercials and just monopolize all the billboards and YouTube videos. He's bought his way. He's not even doing debates because he's like, why would I need to do that? I've bumped up to 15% just by spending like millions and millions of dollars. And if he wins the primary, they'll never, ever run anyone else again. It'll just be like, you pay us this amount of money and you get to be the candidate.
Yeah, I'm sure that's going to be it because so my uncle, he works for this company, or he owns, I think, this company called VCR, Voter Consumer Research, and
Okay.
he does opinion polls. So and like the way those polls are run, like the whole structure of them is not to measure public opinion. Like they have no interest. People who do the polls have no interest in public opinion other than influencing it.
No,
So like
it's statistics
it's
is lies basically.
it's
That's what I
just ways
learned
to
in school.
it's just the way to tell people, because obviously they set up the question so specifically, like, considering that Trump has decreased unemployment, do you agree with
Right. You can
Trump's.
phrase things
Like,
different ways
yeah,
and get different answers. It's the same question, or depending on the people that you choose. Like I saw a poll from, I don't remember where, but it was like, these are the groups of people we included. And they like didn't include Republicans in a particular way. So it was like, who are you going to vote for? I'm like, would you go to like a camp, like a college campus, and just ask the people who are not going to vote anyways? So this is why in 2016, when every poll had Hillary winning by a mile and then Trump won, it like broke people, like
yeah,
cognitively. I think it really broke people because, and that's why the Russia collusion narrative had so much. For 4 years they pushed it, and then it was all, I mean, basically, I mean, there was some manipulation, but I mean, people thought they like flipped votes somehow,
yeah. But
and there was no evidence of that. The evidence was basically like internet manipulation, like Facebook groups and stuff like that.
yeah, that Facebook had just sort of indiscriminately allowed certain people to advertise slightly more than other people,
Which they should. They're a
which is
platform.
fine. I
But
mean, they
now
can't.
now they're trying to do content. Uh, it's the difference between being a host and a publisher. If you're just hosting content, then you can't be hit for copyright strikes because you're not responsible. But if you're a publisher, if you start filtering content like Twitter and Facebook are trying to do now you're a publisher and you can get hit with all these copyright claims. So like, I don't know what they're gonna do.
Okay, yeah, because the whole, as I say, it's been exploding on our screens. Like I don't know why. Even on my YouTube, it's like suggested that I should watch these things like, is Russia colluding with these people, and Julian Assange. The only time he comes up is when they're like, did Julian Assange collude with Russian spies? But no one's mentioned Julian Assange for 4 years, even though he's been held under the pretense of being
I think
extradited
he
to the
got out.
US.
I think he's in the U.S. He's being held for, I don't know what they're doing with him, but like, yeah, the fact that they basically forced him to be in the prison that was the embassy,
Yeah,
and
and
they
then
like cut the power a few times and tried to get him, and like that trumped up. They charged him with sexual assault of these two women, and that turned out to all be bullshit. It was some really disgusting stuff they tried
it
to
was so
pull.
disgusting. I remember when he was released, like the character assassination. It was just like they were talking about him like not cleaning his room, and like there was unflushed toilets, and it was just like the
Yeah.
most low. And it's like from the liberal media, like, and they were
Oh,
saying
dude,
like,
they had an article on Trump where it was like they had a bunch of journalists and everyone got one scoop of ice cream and Trump got two. I couldn't believe I was reading this, and I was like, they really need him, because if they didn't have Trump, their ratings would plummet. They have nothing to talk about. They have been utterly screwed by the internet. Like their
yeah,
economic model. I mean, nobody buys newspapers anymore, so
no.
they have to harvest hate clicks and outrage to make money. So I feel bad for them in a lot of ways, because I don't think people went to journalism school to, I mean, they were probably looking at like Walter Cronkite and other, like, who was the journalist that broke Iran Contra, that
Mm.
I don't remember his name, but yeah, like that's why you get into journalism. You're like, I want to be out in the field, I want to cover interesting stories. And now they're resorting to like the fact that like, Trump dumped a bunch of fish food in a koi pond when he was on his like trade tour in Japan, and
Also,
how
they
that's offensive.
also they like report on stuff on Twitter. They're
Yeah,
like, there's
Twitter has
legitimate.
changed the game.
They're like report, but there's like legitimate reports, and you're like, okay, I'm reading this, and then this is someone's comment from Twitter, and it's like, Lady Gaga was like, this is bad, and it's just like, what? Like, how are
And
you?
and companies are now, uh, they'll be like, so and so said something, there's outrage. But when they claim outrage, it's 7 people with 20 followers each on Twitter being like, I'm outraged, and companies will like fire someone or flip their position. And I'm like,
we
first of
we
all, do you know how easy it is to make 7 Twitter accounts? I could make bots that do this, and you can sway a multi-million-dollar. This is so stupid.
we had this guy. So it's kind of weird. We had this capitalist party of South Africa, South African Capitalist Party, but they had to like, already have the South African Communist Party, so SACP was taken, so they had
Yeah.
to become the ZACP, and the head of that was some guy who became one of the heads of a newspaper. He owned a newspaper or something, and he tweeted. So there was this thing that happened. This company was going downhill, or it was investing in our national airline, which is currently like not functioning so well. And they're like, "Do we need a national airline?" And then there was this article on all these people, all these politicians going to this place to debate: do we need a national airline, or how are we going to save it? And his tweet was just, rats swimming towards a sinking ship, which is an idiom, And he was fired from his job for saying that, because they were like, oh, referring to people as rats is like, remember the Rwandan genocide where people were referring to people as cockroaches? And then like all these people died, and it was
You
just
can
like,
never compare anyone to animals now. We have this thing now where like just don't call people monkeys in general.
oh yeah.
And
Oh,
it's
but that's
it
been
is a
here for a while.
racist trope, but like I don't know. I don't want to get too far down into this. They'll fire people for anything now, which is why I'm on this whole like 4-hour work week, e-commerce, make money outside of an institution, try to find a tribe of people that are going to be supportive of one another. Like Justin Murphy has this thing who's like, I think if you get 70 people together, you don't have to buy health insurance. You can cover each other's health like internally. You could do, I like the idea of having these sort of radical sort of groups that are divested from the current governmental model. I think there was an article I was reading that like the future might look like the Athenian city states that are like hyper capitalist, sort of libertarian. They're independent. The laws are different in each state, and then you make it so that it's really easy to come and go between city states. So if you want to have a city state that's like the healthcare is government owned and like super socialized, everything is very pro government, then you go move there. You can make that California. And then if you want something that's like hyper capitalist libertarian, where it's sort of a free for all, everyone has like guns and crazy pop plants and whatever, you make that Texas or something. But yeah, I'm hoping that's where it trends. But listen, let's take a quick 10-minute break. My buddy has to change out his laundry. I'm gonna go run to the bathroom and get a drink, and we'll pause the recording and then we'll come back.
Sure. I might actually have to call it, because I do have some work to do.
Oh yeah, it's almost 2:00, and I think this thing starts in about an hour.
Yeah, so I still have some work to do for that.
Do you want to just call it now?
Yeah,
we can do
would you
a
be happy with
follow-up.
that?
Yeah, we can do a follow-up discussion another
follow-up.
time. It was great talking to you. And
Yeah, it was great talking.
Also, I think we recorded about an hour yesterday, so
maybe that's plenty.
Yeah.
I mean, we can always go for a round 3 if sometime in the future as well.
Yeah, sure.
It was pretty cool.
I really enjoyed talking to you. This is definitely a lot of political talk, which I didn't think we would get into, but I had fun with it. So
yeah, cool.
So what I'll do is I'll basically put these two together, and then I'll send you both unedited. And then what I'm thinking I'm basically trying to do is I'll post it with your permission, unless there's stuff that you want to edit out, just to like a small group, like indie thinkers or like a few friends of mine. And then once we get feedback from people and everything sounds good, I'll probably release like all in my own time. I'll do like a short intro. If you want to like send me like a biography or anything, and then I'll have a closeout and stuff like that. So I'll send you everything, and I won't release it until we get an AOK from you.
I mean, like I'm way away from you. Like it's pretty. Like, no, you can't do any damage. I promise.
Okay. All right.
But yeah, great.
Camillo, this was awesome, man.
Cool.
I really appreciate it. So
yeah, it was nice to meet you, and love to keep in touch.
Yeah, for sure. I'll see you in an hour, because I'm going to be at the update. So
cool. All right. Thanks a lot.
Take it easy.
You too. Cheers.